Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Andy Rich. I'm the Dean of the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership here at City College of New York, and I want to welcome you to the beginning of our third season of the Rick and Susan Goings Conversations in Leadership. This is a series that began 2 years ago with Gayle King from CBS News and has had an illustrious group of leaders who have achieved the highest levels of their professions and are mostly well-known figures well beyond their professions, but have also had unconventional, unexpected paths through their leadership. It's an extraordinary series that we're so proud of, and that is wonderful when you're here in person and experiencing it, and has a life of its own online, because all of these events are not only live streamed, but they become a part of our archive. And they really help to develop a shared understanding of what the qualities of leaders and leadership are. We are grateful to have this series because Rick and Susan Goings were friends with General Colin Powell. So, you know, the story of this school is we are the School of Social Sciences. We're the home of the public service, the business, the leadership programs at the college. We're now the largest student division of City College, and we were created by General Colin Powell. And General Powell, as some of you may know, 1958 graduate of City College, who was born in Harlem, grew up in the South Bronx, and when it came to college, it was City College or nowhere. And it was while he was at City College that he found ROTC. He found his path to the Army as an officer, went on to be the first Black American as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, National Security Advisor, and Secretary of State. And when he finished his service to the country, he came back to his alma mater, and he said he wanted to give back. He became the chairman of our board. He helped first create a center that was named for him and the school, which was founded 11 years ago. And he did it because he sees in our students today the same qualities that he embodied now almost 65 years ago. Folks for whom City College, this education, is going to make a meaningful difference in their lives, in their families, their communities, and in our country and globe. And his wish for us was that we expose our students to the extraordinary opportunities this country has to offer. And that is what this series is about. And so some number of decades ago, General Powell met Rick Goings, who at the time was, I think, chairman of the board of the Boys and Girls Club of America. He was also, at the time, chairman and CEO of Tupperware brands. And they became friends, and I think it's fair to say that for most of the time they knew each other, General Powell was nudging and nagging Rick to visit City College. And when General Powell passed in 2021, that became the moment, sadly, for Rick and I to get to know each other, and for Rick and Susan Goings, who you'll meet in just a minute, to make a decision to get to know us as a school. And we're incredibly grateful that they did. Rick, thank you. We really appreciate what you brought to our school. And the reason I don't thank Susan right now, sitting right alongside Rick, is because Susan is going to join us in just a moment. Because Susan, it turned out, as we kind of hatched the plans for this series, had a career as a television journalist, award-winning. And when it came to figuring out how would we do this series, I asked her if she'd be willing to have the conversations with some of the leaders that we brought in. And she has done that from the very first, and most of those that have happened since, and has been an extraordinary partner, not just in making this series possible, but in the conversations that we have. And so in just a minute, I want to turn it over to Susan Goings. Today, we are privileged to have the president of MSNBC, the news network, Rashida Jones. She's extraordinary. As you may know, she's had a distinguished career in journalism and as a business executive, and on the journalism side, she's been an Emmy Award winner. She has produced the, I think, most watched presidential debate in history. And she is the first Black American to be the president of a news network, which in many ways, as I learned about her and read her story, and now you're going to get to know her, I saw so many parallels to General Powell. We were intending to have Rashida Jones with us in February, and I don't know if y'all can remember this because it's a beautiful day today, but it snowed. And it didn't end up snowing that much, but the threat of snow was sufficient that we ended up not being able to do it then. And so we rescheduled it way back in, I think, March or April for September 10th. Now, what else is happening today? Well, it just so happens that in just a few hours, we're going to have a monumentally important presidential debate. And so we are extra fortunate that the president of MSNBC can spend a little bit of time with us this afternoon to share her story and teach us something about leadership. So without further ado, I will say before I turn it over to Susan, we will have some Q&A. Susan will be in conversation with Rashida Jones for the first portion of the program. We will then have Q&A. I ask that when we have Q&A, you put your hand up, we'll have people with microphones who will bring them to you, and that you keep yourself to a question. That this wouldn't, because time is so short, we want to have as many different questions as possible, and so we ask you to refrain from extended statements and really go straight to questions. Without further ado, it is my privilege and my pleasure to introduce to you Susan Goings.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you to everybody who's here today. We are so grateful for you for supporting our conversations in leadership. And we're all here because of one person, General Colin Powell. About 10 years ago, I had the honor of interviewing Colin for an opening session for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America for their national conference. And he really liked that interview, and I really liked that interview, primarily because it was just an opportunity for Colin to be Colin. And one of the things he talked about that was so important to him was his family. And starting with his wonderful, gracious, beautiful wife, Alma, who passed away a few weeks ago. He also spoke about his children and gave some really funny anecdotes. You can pull this interview up on YouTube. It's fun to watch. And told these stories about his kids. Well, his daughter, Linda, is the chairman of the board here at the Colin Powell School and is carrying on his legacy. And so to Linda and the other siblings, our hearts go out to you, and please know that Rick and I will always hold your mom and dad right here. So thank you. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this series was have trailblazing people who are leaders in their fields joining us so that you can all hear and hopefully learn something and take away that will help you as you go through life. And you all become leaders, because that's why you're part of this school. So our guest today is absolutely in that category. Please welcome Rashida Jones. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled that you're here. I think
It's not snowing.
No, it's not snowing, but it is a very busy day for you.
Yep.
Might as well be snowing. So, I think that would be a good idea to start out. Having come from the news business, I know what you do, or have a pretty good idea,
Sure.
Although news has evolved greatly in the last couple of decades.
Right.
But can you explain to the students here today and those that are watching from home, can you explain what do you do as the president of MSNBC?
Sure thing. It means I sleep very little and I watch a lot of television and read a lot of things online. No, so I run the brand MSNBC. That, of course, is a television network. We're on live 19 hours a day on any given day, but that's a piece of what we do. It's also digital. It's also streaming. It's also social media. And a big part of it is also trying to chart what does the future look like for a brand like ours? How do we reach people as platforms are emerging and as the world's emerging? So my responsibility, all told, is really not only managing the brand as far as what we do today, but how do we continue to evolve it beyond that? I was having this conversation with a group earlier. We have a group of news associates who are going through their orientation, and one of the questions was, how did you kind of learn digital? And as I explained, when I started in television 1 billion years ago, digital was a marketing tool. And we did our TV thing, and then you put your TV content on digital, and you told people, okay, you found us here, come back and watch us on television. As you think about how the business has grown, and my role, for the role of someone in my seat has evolved, it's all of those things. It's anywhere you find the content and the brand, and that's really how I spend my day.
So, but what is a typical day for you?
I watch a lot of television. So I start early. We start with Morning Joe. We end with 11th Hour. And it could be, what are we doing in this moment? What is the plan for 56 days from now on Election Day? What does 2025 and 2026 and 2027 look like? You kind of always have to live in the immediate, medium-term, long-term in a role like this, and constantly thinking about how do we continue to respond to the trends in the business? How do we continue to evolve our product? How do we, as a people manager, continue to create a culture and an environment where people want to contribute, want to work hard, want to support the work that we're doing? How do we continue to be innovators on platforms? How do we use new technology to find efficiencies and involve what we do? There's so many different pieces to it that will go beyond just kind of the core product. It's running a business in all aspects that you can think about. Ours just happens to be on television and on digital.
So you're planning not only for today, but for 2 years from today.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's this weird thing where you're constantly living in all of these different time periods. It's what are we doing tonight? As I said, at 9:01:30, I can tell you exactly what we'll be doing. We'll be broadcasting this debate. But then it's also what's the plan for inauguration? How do we want to think about positioning ourselves ahead of the 2026 midterms? How do we want to think about new technology or new platforms and how we position ourselves there? It's just kind of this constant stream of the right now, the tomorrow, and the possible.
So in your position now, well, first of all, what were some of the other jobs you had? How long ago did you start in television, and what were some of the other positions that you had coming to this?
I started about a quarter of a decade ago. My first job was as a television associate producer. So again, for those who have been around long enough, we used to do what we called ripping scripts. They came with carbon copy, you might remember this.
I do.
And I would sort scripts, and that was my job. And there was a green and an orange and a pink, and each anchor had their own color. And so I would organize those things. I'd run prompter. I remember,
which is a tough job, by the way.
It's a tough job
Yeah.
because everyone speaks differently. I would build graphics, and I remember when I graduated to writing, and that's when it really clicked. And the idea that I could take the information, synthesize it into 20, 30, a minute worth of content, and I was the person delivering that to the audience was a game changer. I still have, and I know I'm very much dating myself because some of the stuff you guys may have never heard of, I still have the VHS from the first cut-in, 5-minute cut-in that I ever produced. I have no way to play a VHS, and maybe it comes back, but I remember the first time I created something that went on television, and just the high of that, the idea that I could take information, I could process it, and I was the person then bringing it back to our audience was infectious, and I knew I wanted to do that for the rest of my life.
Coming from a person who has boxes of VHS tapes, I completely understand.
Do you have a way to play them, though?
I actually do.
Oh, okay.
But I have them transferred also. You should have that transferred so your kids can see it.
I still have it at least. I have the battle.
Yeah. Or you could have it bronzed or something and do that, yeah. So when you were a kid, what characteristics, what qualities did you have that prepared you to do this job?
If you were to ask my sister and brother, they would say I was bossy. I call that leadership. No, I was always the person that if we needed to organize, I was going to be on the front lines of it. If we needed to figure someone out, I would help everyone get there. And so I always just kind of had this instinct of taking leadership roles. And sometimes, it could be anything from, okay, so what are we having for dinner tonight? Someone's got to choose, I'll do it. We've got to figure out how to do this thing. And so that was always attractive to me. And I remember a point where it was almost like this acceptance point where I said, it could be anyone, but you enjoy it, you're good at it, lean into that. Don't run away from the fact of you're the person who's asked to do this or asked to lead. Consider it a strength and a skill set. But I was always that person who just wanted to kind of lead and guide. And I think it's why I gravitated towards producing early in my career, because you combined the creative of, story selection and how do I showcase it? And okay, so if the story is about a military homecoming, we did a lot of homecomings when I started in my career in Norfolk, Virginia. Okay, so how do I showcase this, and what maps do we build and pull out and graphics, but also it's consequential because it's a point in history, and these families are being reunited, and it's emotional, and how do I pull that out? And then in real time, and especially the live TV aspect, you've got to make these leadership decisions of, okay, we see the ship coming in, so take that thing, move here. And so there were when I realized there was a role in a newsroom where you could be a leader, you could be creative, you could be innovative, and it was called producing, I knew that was my calling.
Mm-hmm. Were you a good student growing up?
I love school.
Oh.
I did. I loved school. I love school. I liked the game of if there is a class where I could get an A in, how do I get there? Let's do it, let's do it. So I really loved school. I just love the challenge of, day one to the last day, and how do I, you're saying the same thing. Yep, I see. Yep. I loved it, and I love the idea of learning too. And I think, for me and just the wild and crazy world we live in, the one thing that keeps me going even today is just this idea of learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're such a great communicator. I'm surprised you're not in front of the camera instead of behind the camera.
My focus has always been bringing those worlds together, and I felt like, again, as I started as a producer and then took that kind of core producer set and moved up the ranks, producing is where I could not only be the creative, I could communicate but in a different way, but I could do it as a leader. And so I knew that combination of roles and skill sets was where I wanted to be. I remember when I was in school and we would do classes and we had these big clunky cameras, and we would switch roles. One week you were a reporter, one week you were the weather person, one week you were the producer. I learned pretty early on, I could do the on-camera stuff, but I really loved producing, and I didn't want to carry the big, heavy camera. And so I would trade all of my reporter and anchor slots and just do producing. And it was probably a little less sexy than some of the other roles, so my classmates would say, oh, you just want to produce? Please take it. I want to be the on-camera person. But I loved it. I loved it.
Well, I think you're also in control, and you get to make the decisions.
You're in control.
Totally get
I
to
think
make.
that's a positive.
I do too.
Yeah.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you leveraged what you were good at and what you enjoyed,
And what I
which is
enjoyed.
really important. Because sometimes people, I think sometimes people spend too much time focusing on how to fix what they don't do well,
Right.
rather than focusing on the positives.
I think it's that, and then I also think sometimes we undervalue the power of passion. And I knew, even starting early in television, where it wasn't necessarily the highest paying field, I knew I loved it. And so I would find a way, and if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. But you also hear stories and you see instances where someone may have an opportunity that takes them to a path that might be more lucrative, or it might be what's expected, or what your family expected, and they don't enjoy it. And what I found is those people just don't last in that space. And so there might be the immediate gratification of, I'm doing this thing that looks good on paper, but it doesn't last if you don't really care about it, and if it's not really what your passion is. I try to tell this to my kids who are, in this point in life where they're thinking about these things from 15 until 22, and go do the thing that you really care about. Like,
Find your passion.
Find your passion.
Yeah.
And even if it feels implausible, even if it feels inconvenient, even if it's not the highest paying job, if it was meant to be for you, all of those things will come, and you'll have the longevity because it's something that you want to do. And then you don't mind working hard. You don't mind coming in early and staying late and working weekends and the inconvenience of having to dig into this when your friends might be doing other things that are more fun. You don't mind it if it's something you really care about.
How do you handle that because you have 4 children?
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that with a big family?
I am lucky in that my kids grew up in this world. And so the 2 oldest, my stepsons, they've seen it from the peripheral as we've merged our families, and they see kind of the passion and interest, and we all just kind of make things work. My 2 started off knowing nothing different.
Okay.
They knew hurricane season when I worked at the Weather Channel. My son, who's a freshman now, he sent me a text this morning and cracks me up because I think sometimes they genuinely forget what I do. My son said, "Is there a debate tonight?" Now he's out of the house, he's in college, so he would have gotten the alert that my daughter got, which is, Mom will be home late tonight. We've got this thing. Oh, by the way, if you want to watch it, it's on channel 603 and da-da-da-da. And so they just know it, and they grew up in it, and I think they also know 2 things. One, how passionate I am about the work that I do, so it gives me a license to pour into it, but they also know when it's important for me to be there for them, I will never let them down. And so we kind of have that, I was going to say this unspoken agreement, but it's actually spoken. We talk about it, and I'll check in with them, and they like to remind me, Mom, you have a cool job.
Aww.
So
doesn't that make you feel good?
It does.
Yeah.
And if that means that we have to sacrifice this moment or that moment, they know I will prioritize the important moments, but they will remind me, why do you stress about this? We're good. I'm like, okay, then we're fine. And I think in some ways, the ultimate assurance is, for the 2 younger ones, they've both expressed interest in this space. My daughter is in high school, and so she's a part of the podcast club. She's in the production program. They have like majors in their school, and she's a production major. My son is a freshman, and he's a communications and media major. So I did not completely scare them away from this world. And when I got those kind of reassurances, my thought was, oh my gosh, what are they thinking? But then it was maybe they saw something in the passion that I bring to the work that I do that they wanted to run towards instead of away from.
Is he going to be upset that you outed him with his text and not knowing about the debate?
Probably,
Yeah.
but at least he did tell me he was going to watch, so
Okay,
that's half the
good.
battle. Yeah.
That's good.
I
That's
think
good.
he was making sure I knew there was a debate. It was more of that.
When I was preparing for this interview, I told you backstage that I watched many, you can find lots of great interviews with Rashida online. I watched many of those, and also looking at your Wikipedia page. Have you looked at it recently?
No.
It says you were born either this year or this year. They're not sure. It's the first time I've ever seen this. Either she's this age or this age. They're not sure.
Great.
So you might want to correct that.
I will fix it. I remember.
I've never seen that before when it says year.
That means I didn't write it.
Yeah, year of birth, it literally has two choices. So, and the other thing I saw is that you said as a child you felt underestimated. Why is that?
I think for me growing up, I grew up in a very loving family. My parents have always and continue to be very supportive. And in some ways, that gave us a little bit of a protection and cushion. But, my sister, my brother, and I, we all went to a Catholic school for at least the first period.
In Pennsylvania.
In York, Pennsylvania. We were at times the only Black students in the school. There was a period where there were two other Black students who I'm still Facebook friends with. Like, that's how small of a community it was. And so we were unfamiliar, we were unknown. People they weren't used to being around Black students. And we were all really strong academically. I remember one of my early report cards, I'm there, and they used to do the parent-teacher conferences, and Sister Mary, I think it was, I got straight A's and everything, and then I got a satisfactory instead of an outstanding in handwriting. And my dad said, so does that mean she's going to be a doctor? I was like, no, it means I have crap handwriting. But there was always this expectation of perfection. And so you marry this drive that I had with what I would say was an unfamiliarity, being one of the onlys. And so I think early on that was established. And then you fast forward to my college years where I worked so hard. I was a really strong student. I started working in the business while I was in college, and I went to an HBCU. And so early years in my professional career, it wasn't as in vogue as it is now, where I would say it's at least more, people understand the dynamics and the value of an HBCU education. But there were times early in my career where people would see, oh, you went to Hampton University. Oh, that's not one of the big schools. That's not one of the important schools. And I would have to prove myself. And so I just kind of always came in with this underdog mentality, not in a way that I had to overtly prove myself or overtly prove them wrong. I just knew performance doesn't lie. Results don't lie.
You were just aware of it.
I was just aware of it, but it was also very easy for me to kind of tune out what the expectation was and to deliver, because that's how I was raised. That's how that's the only mode I had. That's what I knew to do. And then you get to the point where you no longer have to prove it because people see what you bring to the table, and you never want to take that for granted. But if you dwell on what people are expecting from you, you're not delivering at 100%.
But I'm really glad you shared that. Dean Andy shared with me that 85% of the students here are of color, right? And so many are probably experiencing or have experienced the exact same thing that you have. And so do you feel like always being prepared and anticipating is helpful?
Oh, there's never a question about being prepared. And many of you have probably heard your families or your parents or other people say, like, you have to be doubly prepared for the same result. And so I think for a lot of people, especially in the Black community, that just is. Like, there is no question that I can come and not bring 100% and maybe 150% because they may only consider it at 100%. And so I think, again, as either a motivation or it's a distraction. I think for me it was always a motivation. Again, it was almost like this challenge of I'm going to over deliver because maybe they're not expecting me to over deliver for any reason. Fill in the blank. I'm a woman. I'm a woman of color. I came from this community. All of these things. And so I think, at least for me, I was always raised with this idea that you have to over-deliver. You don't have a choice. You don't get the luxury to be mediocre. And what I would say is having that motivation early on and always living in that. And it's not necessarily I don't lead with that. You have to be very careful to not allow it to create a level of defensiveness in you. It just kind of, it's who I am. I think it's part of the reason I've been able to be strong and excel in my career, because I've always been focused on success.
How do you even learn that, like, to make sure it's not a defensive mechanism?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think it's just awareness. It's awareness, because part of, and actually I would take it back to what we talked about as far as passion. If you love it, you don't want it to ever eat you up, whatever the it is, right? And for me, as we're talking about career, I don't want my career to feel like a challenge, or I don't want it to feel like combative. I was at an event last night, and we had to share these quotes that have shaped our leadership style and our ability to lead. And one that stuck with me, and I wrote it down, and I had first of all, I'm a big phone person, so I write everything in my phone, but this one, I had a little notebook, and I wanted to write it in my handwriting, and I took a picture of it. So
in the bad handwriting.
My terrible hand, still terrible. It's even worse now that I don't have to write because I'm texting everything. But the quote was, "Work is not war." And I thought it was so strong and so meaningful, because the idea was, if it's work, you should want to do it, not feel like you're fighting to do it. And you can think about that in a lot of ways. You shouldn't feel like you're at war to prove yourself. You just do. You shouldn't feel like you're at war to convince yourself that this is what you want to do. If it's not your passion, think about something else. But it was this idea of remembering that what we do and what we get to do is a privilege. And it should be a positive and not a negative. And the moment it starts feeling like war, either you have to reset your mindset, or you have to think about a different way to go at it.
Do you still think in the back of your mind all the time, I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm the first to do this? Or at some point, does that just go away and you accept it?
It never goes away. I think about it through this lens, and I think about it through the lens of looking at you guys. I feel like my reputation and my performance sets the expectation before I walk in the door. But I know how important it is for people who look like me to see leadership and high performance at a certain level. And so it's never lost on me that I'm the first in all of these categories. I know how important it is to continue to lean into that, because I want to make sure people who look like me feel that this is their path. Any one of you can be doing something like this. I remember being in a conversation with some colleagues, and I was like in a program where I was serving as kind of a mentor, and these were senior management level colleagues. And I remember one woman in the panel, I didn't know her, and again, our company is a big company. You could do anything from work in a theme park to on a movie set to in a newsroom to all of these things, right? And so this particular woman worked in a division that had nothing to do with news. And she was kind of quiet during the panel. And then somewhere in there she said, you talk about where you went to college often. I went to Hampton University. In my office, I have a picture of what we call Emancipation Oak, which is on the campus of Hampton University. So when I'm doing Teams or Zooms, you can see it right behind me. And she said, you talk about where you went to college a lot. You're very proud of the fact that you went to Hampton. I've been here for 22 years, and I've never actually said out loud at work where I went to college. And she said, not because anyone made me feel uncomfortable, but I never thought that I could do that and people would understand that because I went to an HBCU, it didn't mean that I had an inferior experience and my education was inferior. So, and she said, I've never said it out loud. And she said, tomorrow I'm going to find a reason to say it out loud for me. Not because anyone told me that I shouldn't and I can't, but I want, you've made me feel that it's okay to be proud of everything that comes with you. And that meant a lot. Yeah. And that meant a lot in the sense that I don't have to walk in a room and say I'm a Black woman. It's very clear. First of all, my name is Rashida. So you kind of know what you're getting. But I know that being myself, being comfortable with being myself and being my whole self helps other people to realize that they can and should do the same. And I very genuinely feel like it's being all of yourself and who you are is part of your superpower. You're going to bring something to the table that maybe people with a different background don't have, don't bring, a different perspective. there may be things that I think of through the lens of my own life experience that is helpful to the organization. And I think the more we're comfortable leaning into that, but I know I need to be comfortable being myself for other people to take the lead and realize I want to set an example.
Well, it goes back to what you're good at, and trying to identify in yourself, this would be something that would be good for me to maybe pursue as a career.
Absolutely.
So you brought up mentors. Did you have mentors when you were growing up?
I pick up mentors all the time. I still pick up mentors. No, I did. I remember early on, and mentors serve different purposes in different phases. And I've had a couple instances where people who were mentors to me, I've been turned around to serve in that way. I remember early on in school, my freshman year, I had a person who started as a classmate. She was a late in life student who came back to finish her degree. I was 17, she wasn't. She was a local anchor who had come back to finish her career. Her name was Barbara Sierra. She just retired in Virginia. And we started as classmates. She graduated. She was the main anchor at the local station, helped me get my first job, helped me to develop my writing. I talked about separating the scripts and ripping the scripts, as we called it.
Was she pink?
She was pink. She was
pink.
definitely pink. And she was one of, in my early career, not only consequential in helping me to hone my craft, but to also help me understand the value of being present, the value of raising my hand, the value of building relationships. And so she served as a mentor to me from literally the time that I was 17 until now. And I've picked up people like that along the way. Another very close mentor, Yvette Miley, runs the NBCU Academy program, and this is one of our partner schools. And she's someone who, from the moment I met her, probably 12, 13, 14 years ago, has been one of those motivating factors to remind me to always live in my passion, to remind me to pursue excellence, to remind me to push myself for more, to remind me the importance of being a good, kind person, to remind me to be curious. And those kinds of relationships are so important. And I would also say, as I said, at this level, I still will find people who may be in different businesses or have different interests who I would consider mentors. I try to do a good amount of that myself. But I would say even at your level, for all of the mentors that you find and people that you connect with and people who can help you, I guarantee you there are a dozen people who wish they were sitting in a seat like this, who wish they had your expertise, who are even earlier in their career paths than you are. And so for every mentor you pick up, make sure you're thinking about how do I reach back. Even early in your careers, early in your academic journey, there are people who you can be helpful to also, and that's something I've learned.
I think sometimes mentors, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that you encounter in person.
Yeah.
It can be somebody that you admire and that you look at how they live their life or where they are in their career and how did they get there and just learning about them. And sometimes they're secret mentors, I think.
It's true, and I also think sometimes I think most people are good people and they want to be helpful. And I would suggest, if there's somebody in a different division, in a different, a different school here on campus, or even someone who's in their professional career, and you just reach out to them and ask, the worst thing that can happen is they don't answer your email. Or, first of all, they would probably never say no, they'll just ignore you. But there's no harm in trying to pursue those relationships. Even if it's someone that you don't know and you're reaching out and genuinely looking for some guidance.
Yeah. Well, I used to say to my sons, if you don't ask, I'm pretty sure they're not going to respond.
They're not going to find you.
Yes, that's right. So you need to ask. You have a 50% chance of them responding or saying yes or perhaps saying no, and then you move on. Yeah, so. Who were the people that you admire? Like when you were a little girl, who did you admire?
My parents, just because they were the epitome of hard work. This is a little bit of a weird one, but my English teacher, Miss Olson, I remember she took me to my first opera. She helped encourage me to join the student newspaper, which I joined my 10th grade year in high school. And again, one of those things where I didn't know anything about, I thought I wanted to be an English teacher, A, because I looked up to her, and B, again, in my young calculation, I thought, well, the class I do the most writing in is English, and I like writing, must be an English teacher, there we go. And she introduced me to journalism and the idea of storytelling, and I would say at an early age, leadership. I remember And it was part of it was because I don't think there were many folks at my school who wanted to do the job, but I became the editor of the newspaper early because I had the opportunity and I had the exposure, and even by my junior year I had the experience, and so that taught me a different level of leadership. And so early on,
Miss Olson.
she was, I mean, she was. I would say most students would say she was a little bit of the mean teacher. She was very discerning. She graded she was a difficult grader, but I learned a lot from her.
That's funny, because my 92-year-old mom is watching, and I bet she's sitting there going, yours was Mrs. Olson too, yours was
Are you
Mrs. Olson.
serious?
Yeah, but mine was in the 2nd grade, and I worked hard to make straight A's, because if you did, at the end of the year, you got to go to her house and eat peanut butter sandwiches and swim in the lake.
Well, that's all you need to hear.
Yeah, it was a big deal with alligators. So, yeah. But it was still cool. Yeah, it's still good. All right, I want to move on to MSNBC, and we've talked about the debate, which is tonight. And yeah, she's watching her watch. What time is it? News is very different now from when I worked. I mean, I was taught I would never give my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, it was just, you gave the facts, and you let the viewers determine, you know, what their opinion was about it. But now there are many networks, many different news sources where they are opinion, they are a lot of political discourse, and there are a lot of people have been critical of that, and sometimes critical of you personally as a leader of that organization. Sure. How do you handle that?
You know, I go back to our core responsibility. Our responsibility is to inform the public. I think, you know, there are lots of different ways to do that, and you're right, there are some outlets that focus on kind of through the lens of reporters and reporting, and for us, we have day parts that focus on that exclusively. But I think there's also room for context. There's also room for perspective. You know, if you think about any, you know, print outlet, there's the A1 and there are the op-ed pages. And so we try to serve our audience both. All of it's based in fact. All of it has the foundation of factual journalism. We have
Not every station.
I can only speak to MSNBC.
Okay.
And so we have that same foundation, but the goal is how do we deliver the information in a way that may get to people who are looking for a certain understanding of what's happening in the world, who are looking for the context and perspective. And so my core focus is the public service that we do. Nothing else matters. None of the other noise matters. My job is to lead an organization that does a public service, and that's what gets me excited every day. That's what gets me up in the morning. That's what gets me through long days like today, is knowing, you know, despite any noise that exists, and it's usually, you know, not the minority, our focus is the public service, and I stick with that.
Can you explain how when information comes in, how do you determine whether or not it is factual or not?
I mean, we have a very robust team of reporters and journalists who will verify, validate. You know, we've got layers of multiple levels of sourcing, so, you know, and direct sourcing. So if you told me that you heard from someone, something happens, that's not a direct source. And so we go through these layers of vetting, and we have a very strong group of journalists in our standards team that will help us through that process. We have, you know, hundreds of journalists who on any given story may be working to fact check, may be working to source any bit of information. And so, and what's beautiful about our organization as a big news group, we've got these multiple brands under one news group: NBC News, MSNBC, CNBC, Telemundo, plus all of our local stations. And so we, in a lot of cases, will centralize that news gathering information. So we're making one effort that then each of us can pull from. And so the same level of standard that we use in any one division, we use across the entire division.
So where do you think most of this crowd gets their news from?
Not on television. You have TV? Give that man a raise. Thank you. But and the reality is a lot of people are consuming our content. They're consuming our brand. There are some people who are doing it on platforms that aren't a traditional television platform. And one of the things we really focused on, and it's why, like, my focus is the brand, not necessarily the channel, is how do we bring our content that's vetted, that's verified, that's authentic, that's credible. How do we bring it to all of the places where you guys are currently getting your news? That might be on YouTube, which we perform at a very high level. It might be TikTok, which we've got over 2 million followers. It might be through push alerts and an app read. And so part of what's changed, and we talk about kind of the evolution of the business, is we've had to diversify how we deliver the information. It all still comes from kind of the core nucleus that is MSNBC News, but there are more places today. You might listen to us in your ear and never turn on your television that day because we're in all of these places. And in some ways, like, that's exciting.
Yeah.
You know, and the audience, the consumers have driven that evolution, and then we've had to meet people where they are, and now we're in a mode where we can kind of continue to evolve and innovate in how we bring that content to all of the different places where people are consuming.
So what is the projection in the next 5 years, 10 years? How are people going to get their news?
So it's so interesting you say that, because I feel like every 5 years, the next 5 years is going to be the end of television. It's not happening. Look, I think it'll continue to evolve. I think there are some people who will make the calculation that corded television isn't where they want to get their information. I don't know that anyone knows exactly. What I do think is it will become more diversified than ever. I don't expect that there will be one moment where, okay, it shuts off. You know, think about radio. There was a time where more people were consuming on radio, and then radio took a different form in the sense of streaming, in the sense of, you know, these different platforms. So I think we don't necessarily have the playbook of how it evolves, but it's also still, for most organizations, kind of the core business. It's the core business function. And I think when you add in corded television plus all of these other platforms and areas where people can get content, you know, the bar charts may just be different colors, but I think people's interest in news and information won't decline. I just think it'll change where they get it from.
I continue to have concerns about the internet, and primarily because kids might see, well, yesterday, Rick and I were in Waterville, Maine, and we visited the Alphon Youth and Community Center there, which is part Boys and Girls Clubs of America, one of their units, and also the YMCA, the only one in the United States. It was an incredible complex. And for those of you who don't know what a Boys and Girls Club is, Google it, because you should learn. It's a remarkable organization here in the United States. About 5 million kids go every day to a club.
Yep.
It's run by some great leaders. And my husband and I started World Youth Club. So we were with a group of 8 people who were very passionate about their communities and their country and helping people around the world.
Right.
And as we walked around, there was a 10-foot tall, Ken Walsh, who runs the organization, said, you have to come see this. There was a 10-foot tall picture of Colin Powell.
Wow.
His head on the wall in the gym, and a quote from him. And I started thinking about our conversation for today, because that made me go here, and about how they work so hard at these clubs to teach kids to respect each other, no matter what your differences are. And I mean, for us with World Youth Clubs, because we're in 46 countries, we have different languages, different cultures, different countries. Yeah. And here you have, you know, it's like a big kettle of different, you know, skin colors and religious beliefs, et cetera. But when you're on the internet and you see a short video clip that you think is something with the news, you don't know the genesis of that. What happened before? What happened after?
Right.
What's the history? So how do you combat that?
I mean, it's difficult, and not to mention the fact that anything that could have initially been legitimate could be manipulated through deepfakes and whatnot. And so I've had a very fast evolution in this space, and it started with kind of the same idea, like, no, the internet can be a bad place, and we should be careful about having a presence on platforms that have bad information and where people can share disinformation. And my very fast evolution was, but we need to be the light in the darkness. We need to make sure if people are gravitating towards these platforms, they know that they are credible places to get their information from. And so there's probably no marketing campaign that is going to convince a person who's choosing to get content on TikTok to not use TikTok. But what we can do is make sure we're on TikTok with credible information, and you know we're a credible brand, and ensuring that there is at least light in that, and not that TikTok's a dark space, but light in dark spaces where there's misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes, and the like. And so I think for us, we want to continue to make sure we are appearing in those places where we know people are gathering content. I think it's more effective to meet them where they are than to try to get them into different places. And that's really where our focus has been.
What about AI? Are you embracing it? Are you using it in any way?
Yes and yes. So I think it's an inevitable. I think if you think about, so my evolution here, again, started from a place of fear, like many people, like, oh, what is possible? And it's going to change how we do all these things, and it's changed a good thing. And my evolution has been, first, we're still early days, and so we know there's a lot of work to be done to work out the kinks, so to speak, and to perfect the technology. But we shouldn't assume that it's always going to be imperfect. You know, with the right standards in place, with the right restrictions in place, assuming the technology gets to a point where we trust the technology itself.
Is that going to happen, though? Are there going to be restrictions in place?
I think it's up to, I think in some cases, how we use it, we'll put parameters and restrictions into place. But I think about more so.
So you're not talking about government regulation, but within the organization.
You know, I'll use the comparison you use with your organization, and you're in 46 different countries. How do you create one standard of regulation that applies worldwide? I think there's some time to figure out what the regulation process is. I think for organizations, as we figure out where our parameters are, you know, I think about the opportunities and efficiencies. I think about how can we use the technology to generate more trusted content? How do we use the technology to create customization? How do we use the technology to reach communities maybe that have low penetration of television? And so I think there's opportunity. I think none of us in this industry have cracked the surface of what that looks like. I try to use, you know, all of the various platforms that exist just to kind of get my machine going. And so, oh, you know, this one will take all of your emails and summarize the 10 emails on this thread and summarize it into one. Let me see how that works.
Yeah.
So I've tried to become familiar with it. I remember this was a couple years ago, I was asking my kids, like, are you familiar with like ChatGPT and other platforms like that? And so initially they said no. And then one of the kids said, oh, you mean the essay app? I was like, wait a minute. This app writes essays? But for them, it wasn't that they were using it to write essays. It's just so commonplace. And I think, again, sometimes, especially when you've been around for a while, if your instinct is to run away from it, we're missing opportunity to embrace what will become the inevitable.
Do you guys use ChatGPT and the other AI? Almost
There's
every
so
head
many
in this
now.
audience is nodding.
Yeah. To the point where I know a lot of universities will include in their syllabus publishing, like, here are our AI rules. Like, instead of saying, don't ever use it, it's not a thing, here are the rules around it. First, disclose it, and here are the parameters where you can use it. I think we're all realizing, you know, you can sit in class and pretend it's not up on your screen, or we can embrace the fact that we know it exists, and here are the parameters that we want to put around it.
And just in the last year, it's improved drastically.
Yeah, and it moves fast.
Yeah.
It moves fast.
It really does. So if you were a young Rashida sitting here in this audience today, what would you have liked to have learned today?
Oh, that's so interesting. It's so funny because you asked how long I've been in this business, and it's been about 25 years, give or take. And it still feels like yesterday, though. I remember sitting in rooms like this. I remember sitting in Armstrong Hall at Hampton and hearing speakers like this. And if I were sitting in the room, first of all, I'd be sitting in the front row, mainly because my vision is terrible and I like to take notes. I want to hear the possible. You know, like there's the operational stuff about how the business works and how my job works. But my hope is you guys heard something that maybe motivated you to reach for something that maybe you weren't thinking about. I know when I was in college, this wasn't on a vision board for me per se.
Did you have a vision board?
I knew, you know what it was? I knew early on, I remember saying, I want to one day when I'm old, like my 40s, because I didn't know any better, I want to be a show executive producer. And I think that's so cool, and you get to lead and you get to drive.
And you have far exceeded that in your early 40s.
And I remember the first time I did it scared the heck out of me because I was like, all right, now what? And then I think the takeaway for me was stop picking one mark on a board and push yourself to maybe something that you've never even imagined before. And that's the only reason you get in a chair like this.
That's some really good advice, everybody. Really, really good advice. So how can a young person today position themselves to have early career success?
Yeah.
Although I think, everybody gets a trophy kind of thing. And so what can they do?
I think going after big swings, one of my first internships in college was with the NBA. And it was a national internship program, and it was here in New York, and I was in Virginia. And again, this was pre-email and really pre-internet. And I remember getting I applied for the program because I applied to everything. And I remember getting the letter in the mail, and I was like, wait, they accepted me to an internship in New York City? Like, I applied thinking there's no way I would get this, but it was more of a thing like, okay, you have to apply to a certain number of internships, check. And it gave me just an experience that was pivotal. And so I think, thinking about like, what are the big swings to take? You guys have the opportunity through programs like NBCU Academy to, come, do programming and work with us. Like, what are those big opportunities? We're 15 minutes away. What are just the big gets and go after those. And then I would also say, use those opportunities to gravitate towards what you want to do as much as to rule out what you don't want to do. And that could be geographically, I know I don't want to live in this area versus that area, but you may not know that until you get to test drive it, or I thought I wanted to go down this career path, but after some experience, I want to go into that career path. I think that's really critical early career, because the worst thing that you can do is get into the marketplace in a role that you're not passionate about, that you don't feel like is for you, and have to make a pivot later in life. And so I would say use this time to try some things.
Right.
Try some things that maybe, especially as quickly as technology is changing, as these businesses are changing, that maybe you didn't think would be of interest. You just never know.
And internships are really important.
Yep.
Or trying different jobs too.
Yep.
Like one summer do this, or after school do this.
Yep.
And I had many jobs.
Don't
and-
be
and-
afraid to work hard, 24
Yes.
hours in a day.
Yeah, and learn and soak it all in.
Yep.
Andy, should we open it up for questions?
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Okay.
How are you going to do it? You want to call in?
I think they're going to get a hand mic, I think,
Oh, great.
handheld. Yeah. Okay. I see a hand raised. Hi.
How you doing? First off, I want to say thanks, Rashida, for coming, and to the narrator. Thank you for asking the beautiful questions and the great introductions to Rashida Jones.
What's your name?
My name is Christopher Bender. I apologize about
Hi, Christopher. I have a Christopher. I'm pretty sure every parent has a Christopher.
that. Yeah, it's a common name, right? All right. So, Rashida, I have a question. How comfortable are you with AI-generated news anchors, and they're using your likeness instead of using you as a human being?
Yeah, so I think that's so fascinating.
Good question.
Because there's so many layers, and fascinating in the sense of like the ethical questions that go with it, right? There's so many layers to that. And I think none of them have been figured out yet. I would say this, first of all, from our brand standpoint, I think it's important, the human connection for delivering news and information is important. I think part of the reason our audience tunes into us is because they want to hear the thoughts of that person, not necessarily the computer-generated thoughts of that person. What's fascinating to me is I think the fact that I don't really know the answer, or I haven't formulated in my head yet, how do you determine who owns your likeness? And so, I think about it through the lens of an anchor, but I, just think about it for myself or yourself. If someone were to watch speeches that I've done or watch interviews that I've done, and then sit here and do an automated version of that, I don't think I like that.
Right.
Because that's me, and I own my identity. I own the right to evolve, and like whatever you got as far as like the past history of what I said may not be how I feel now. And so I personally think that the image and likeness and ideology of a person should belong to that person. But I also don't know yet how the businesses evolve to kind of figure that out.
It's interesting because there are laws that protect image and likeness and
Right.
name. And but some states are better than others. California has one of the strongest. But
Yeah.
good question,
great
thoughtful question. Next, up here, the man with the TV.
Hi, Rashida. Why was MSNBC the place for you to bring what you have to offer?
Oh, that's a great question. So I started with NBC 11 years ago. And one of the things that attracted me to come there and then eventually like move around the company and frankly, eventually this role, all the same answer. It's the sense of camaraderie, the sense of community. It really is a family, and people say that in different organizations and different businesses. I think MSNBC is unique in that way, that we're all really rooting for each other in the same thing. And then I would also say the public service. You know, I really believe that the work that we're doing day in and day out is purpose-driven. We're here for a reason. We're writing the first draft of history, and to get to do that on such a big stage, and I would say especially at such important timing. We talk about timing. We could have done this in February. We're doing it on a debate night. Like, everything happens for a reason, and I think to get to do this at this place, at this time in history, in this role, I couldn't have ordained myself. It was all purpose-driven. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Good afternoon, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Lately, we've had certain countries like France doing an arrest of the founder of Telegram, and Brazil, the Supreme Court has cut off X because both the founder and also Mr. Musk are engaged in disinformation warfare.
Right.
And also other types of activities that take place in their platforms. What is your thoughts about that type of censorship, if you consider it censorship? Because many times this type of persons hide behind freedom of speech.
Yeah. So I think, I generally speaking think about censorship through the lens of intention. If the intention is to misinform or mislead people, I think that's wrong. I think when you have a platform like this, platforms like the ones that you mentioned, we have a responsibility to the best of our ability, deliver factual, truthful information. And so I think that's just kind of my guiding principle. I think when you're in a role like this, when you have a platform like this, it's our duty to make sure we're trying to do more good and not mislead or manipulate people. And I think when you're intentionally trying to mislead or manipulate people, I think that's wrong.
But then, I'm a bilingual mental health first responder. I've seen news covered
Right.
where there is self-censorship, because you don't want to show somebody jumping off a building.
Sure.
Sorry, but we're at a certain time where we do not want to use the word fascist in the political discourse when it's happening and it's about to occur. We might fall right into a fascist state come next year.
So I think it's always difficult when you, especially as a news organization, prescribe kind of universal labels to people because it's so subjective, right? And so part of what we get to do at my network is, based on fact, based on the foundation of truth and information, when you're watching MSNBC, for example, you're hearing the interpretation of how that person felt like through their lens and their perspective. And so I think it's not necessarily effective for there to be kind of one rule or blanket as far as how we, across all of our brands, refer or use labels or whatever. I think you really have to take each individual moment, each individual instance, and put it in a true lens and a true light, but it's all very subjective. And so like your impression or interpretation may label it one way, this person's may label a different way, but I think that's why it's also important to have a diversity of perspectives to have those conversations. It might not be as simple as like a one word or one graphic, but having conversations that are a little bit broader and more reflective of the reality, I think is the way to get to that point.
But I also think that you have a power to control some of that narrative, because I remember when terrorists wanted to be called freedom fighters,
Yeah.
and anti-abortionists wanted to be called pro-life, and we had to make a decision.
Yeah.
What do we want to call them? What's
Yeah.
the fair, what's the honest representation of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, it's always a judgment call of, again, you want to do no harm, but you want to be honest and factual. And in those cases, you just have to figure out what is the most honest way and of the best service to the audience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Do we have time for one more, or we?
Yeah.
One more. And we have a lot of hands up. Daniel?
Hi.
Hello.
Lovely to hear from you. I was wondering,
Move it a little closer to your mouth, thank you.
Is this better?
Yes.
For a mere mortal like myself, and like a lot of us, younger students here, and a lot of us coming from, backgrounds and communities where, as you said, like, you have to be prepared, you have to bring your 150%. How would you advise us to deal with the occasional, like, shortcoming? Like, have you ever dealt with a failure or a rejection, and like how do you frame that for yourself?
I think that's such a great question, because you cannot set an expectation of perfection to the point that it paralyzes you. And I would say, and I learned this early in my career, don't hide from it, don't run away from it, learn from it. And so, when you bring the temperature down with yourself, because oftentimes we're the worst critics of ourselves. We're afraid to fail because sometimes in your head you overemphasize, I made this mistake, they're going to now think everyone who looks like me can't do this thing, right? And so I think sometimes it's an internal calculus to not expect perfection. You should expect to give 100%, but that isn't the same as perfection. So bringing the kind of the calculus down within yourself, but then I think most importantly, how do I not run from whatever that mistake was, and how do I learn from it? And I would say more often than not, and when I learned this, because we've all evolved as people, when I realized instead of trying to hide the fact that I made a mistake, I'm thinking about very early in my career, there was a story that I was on duty producing the morning news, the story broke, I missed it. And there was a version that could have explained to my news director, I missed it because this person did that and da-da-da-da. What I decided to do was, I missed the story. Here is a 2-page report on what happened. Here's what I learned from it. Here are the processes that I put in place so this doesn't happen again. And here's how we will measure it. That was way more impressive than never missing the story in the first place. And so find the way to use it as your fuel. Find the way to use it as your motivation. And then again, learn from it, like truly learn from it, not only, to show whoever needed to see that you learn from it, but also for yourself. And I will tell you, especially in television, and I would say especially early on, the best way to learn how to be a good producer is to make mistakes and learn how to not do it again. And I would say that applies in a lot of ways.
And take responsibility, and that's what you did.
Take responsibility, yeah.
Well, thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
This
Let's
was
all thank
fantastic.
Rashida.
Thank you. This is great.
Greatly appreciate it. That was wonderful. It was great. Thank you. It was really, really great. Really great. Really great. Let's go back there.